I didn't want to go too far down the path without just checking in with the team after this week and just seeing where we're at on everything. So the main thing, just from a high level, we are going to move forward with the feature object. The first MVC, which I've linked to in the sheet, is the basics of just getting the object up in some way. And I keep saying object, but we know it's an issue type of features. MVC1, we obviously need that to be able to embed hierarchy and other things. If we don't actually have the object on the screen, we can't do it. So that one we've kind of had to lock, we need the planning object first. We need a URL that makes sense and scales. We need FE tracking started. And like you can see in the spreadsheet I've linked, I took I showed this as well earlier this week, but in terms of front end tracking, the goal with these new objects would be that each field, everything that we do, would have a front end snowplow trackers for views.
Snowplow.
Yeah. For editing titles, editing descriptions, just that we would get that sort of in at the very start. So I've put the rough draft of basic CRUD. I know there's probably a lot more implementation issues that would have to go in above or below these for the architecture shifts, for things like filtering, if we get the acceptance criteria done, like filtering these issue types out of the main lists. But my goal for this is to kind of chunk down MVC1 and know how soon the team could probably put weights on these. So we'd like to be able to go by 14.2 in terms of implementation and starting them. So the question is, if I import these today, can we start the planning breakdown process for these initial CRUD ones that are a little less involved, but they do set the stage for the rest? The other themes I have just as a reference are, some of them are parity, bringing all the fields over, like bringing comments over. Gabe said this one is actually going to be a big endeavor because it's basically the whole of commenting has to be moved over onto Vue. And so I'm wondering if that could even start soon and get weighted, like we'd start an epic for that and breaking down just what do we need for comments to get in. The other theme is the parenting, which is obviously also going to be a heavy lift. And then just the parity of all epic fields. I'm just going to copy over an issue for every single field that we have, attachments, related MRs, emojis, and counts. Like each of these things that gets us parity, I'll create an issue for. Sorry, my alarm is going. So high level, when can we start weighting them? Because I'm going to bring them over. What is missing? Is there anything? I know, John, you had said acceptance criteria. So I half-assed a job at putting in some things on just this one, but I think also listing out how we want these, the specificity of the acceptance criteria. When you've added a feature, it shouldn't show in other places, things like that.
Yeah, I didn't know where to put this comment, sorry, but I wanted to copy this issue in for reference. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, like, so I think I mentioned this yesterday. This feels really like test cases where we're starting with a greenfield object, we're starting really, really basic. And they had all these things, I think, at the beginning. They had title and description, basically. They don't show up in issue lists. They have their own part of the UI. So it's very, very, very similar. And what worked there, like, and so I'm when you say you're going to import these, you mean like to create like a bunch of issues for each of these line items, right? But I'm wondering, what do you think about having one issue and letting the engineers maybe create to break it down? Because like semantically that does make sense, like that you would do like, okay, let's have a title, then let's have a description, and then let's create assignees. But the engineers might be thinking like, okay, first of all, let's create the issue type and block it from issue lists, right? That's like step one, because that stops it from any testing from appearing in issue lists. And then, the next thing is like title and description together, because it makes sense to do them as one thing. So what do you think about like just having an issue with acceptance criteria that says, I want an object that's an issue type, that has a title, that has a description, that has assignees, and let the engineers like tell you if something's too complex for the first iteration or something could be done that you
Yeah, I
didn't
mean,
expect.
I'd be open to that. I think typically when you do these types of planning top down, you write each one as a story, which is what I was doing. And I'm hiding those story columns. But the ideal thing is you're thinking from the user's perspective, like I want to create an object and edit its title. And then the team could obviously break out any other tasks, other issues that are needed to do that. What I didn't want to do though is just have it be a free-for-all where we start converting everything all at once without sort of getting that first MVC app. But I am open, even if I put like all 4 in, they can be rearranged, they can be deleted, new ones can be added. It can be broken down to whatever engineering feels they need to do.
Okay, fair
But,
enough. I wasn't
yeah,
delighted about the task list style that test cases were done in, but it was what Felipe preferred, and in hindsight, it worked pretty well. In that case, like I'm open to doing the whole like having a
yeah.
parent epic and MVCs and things arranged. That works too. We've just done it with epic boards, so yeah.
And to be
Yeah,
clear, there's a big design effort around this, which I'm sure was in the other, but like to get Holly and Alexis in sync to the point where each of these things, like I want to view this new layout, the Holly's really got to track to that and participate, because it's not just a copy paste. These things are going to be now in a more of a mobile view. There's going to be a lot of different pieces that directly translate to the user. So I just want to make sure we don't forget design, because this is a big design undertaking at the same time. And that's why I have Holly and Alexis in each of these columns. And they're going to have to really sprint to get these views up for the team in this short time frame.
yeah, so a couple things off of that. As far as splitting the issues up in this way, I think, I agree, we need some level that you've kind of listed out here. Because I'm thinking about like with iteration cadences, it was kind of hard where we created a bunch of issues for every technical task. It was hard to get a feel for where we were overall. So I think by having, like, we can have another layer of, say, tasks beyond the user stories that you've created, but I think we need some level, like you've done here, so we can just say, okay, title is in production, even if it's behind a feature flag, that's done. We can close that out. We know, okay, since that's done, we're 25% of the way done with adding features.
Yes.
So there's that. As far as the design, I'm a little worried about that, in that we don't have any of the designs ready for feature yet. If we're going to try to get, so actually, I guess my question is, MVC1, are we time boxing that at all? Is that going to tie into, like, we want to be complete with MVC1 in 14.1?
It's not like 14.1, I'm seeing as our team waiting these and getting some started, but not releasing. My goal was that like for 14.2, we could have an MVC1 done, which gives us 2 full releases, which is CRUD tracking URLs and these new designs, which the, Holly will be uploading onto each of these issues when she's got them. So I'm saying MVC1, like we try to track it to a release, but with an architecture move like this, we can take longer. And we also decided we're gonna have it behind a feature flag for 2 to 3 releases minimum. And we can talk about when to pull it, but we wanna pull it when it makes sense for the customer. Like when there's good stuff in there, like hierarchies, it's compatible with what an epic might be. So we do have some play, and it doesn't like I put them in themes, but they don't have to track to a 30-day window right now. We could get more specific later once we've got weights on these things. Once the team's going, maybe they'd say, oh, I convert all 20 of these object fields over in like 10 points, like maybe we'll get more specific once we're off the ground, but I know it's blurry beyond the first release or the first theme, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so like looking at this, I think we should also add one more user story around the API, because that's also kind of user facing too. Like we can write a user story that says, as a user, I want to be able to access a feature through the GraphQL API.
Yeah. Is that a block to the object going live, or could that be its own, the API be its own theme, like comments, and have a little more definition, like more breakout in an epic? Would that block our object going up?
Yeah, I think so, because we are going to use that API to create the views for MVC1. So it's not like we don't have to get in everything that we'll eventually need for the API before we start working on MVC1,
Right.
but we need to at least get the schema defined for what we are trying to accomplish in MVC1, if that makes sense.
I
So
have a question. Are we building a new object? Or because we already have an API for issues?
Right, yeah, if it's on the issue type, like I mean, other than the new things that exist for the feature issue type, the existing issue endpoints should do the trick, right? I think.
I think we need to add finish Brett's merge request for adding the type to the basically creating the database table and then exposing it if it's not already exposed in the API. But then like there's some stuff we'll need to add that doesn't exist on issues, but I don't think that would be like title or description or anything.
We should still track it, like just to make sure that we have like some way of knowing that we're getting, like the front end can get the things they need from the GraphQL API though.
That's a good point. That's another core theme, API. That it's filtering to that issue type once you hit the URL, and how that works with the URL. That's another question I have, is like, is feature going to be in the URL? If a user edits there and the feature edits the name to be something else, like initiative, they want to call it something different. How does it? We don't have to go fully down that road, but I would think the URLs need to be thought through as well. The other question I have, I know Gabe said that we already have the Redis slots going for issues. How can we filter based on type? That's a question I have to the team. Once we have epics in there, how do I separate epic as an issue type or feature from the project planning issue types for doing tracking? I know we'll be able to, with these front end trackers, we can add metadata like that is issue type. Do we have that kind of flexibility with the Redis trackers?
That's a good question.
Augmented.
I presume we're sending the issue type along with the I guess this is the Redis hyper log thing you're talking about, right? Like the metrics we take when large numbers of actions are taken.
The ones that
I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I'll need to look that up, because the cardinality would be high when we get the custom issues, and that's what creates a problem typically with these things. Like, is that like when you can have an arbitrary number of different issue types, like it becomes problematic. I'll need to look into that,
Yeah.
Kristen.
Can you add metadata just like the front end trackers, like where you could put an integer in like a nested,
I don't think so.
or is it
I think
only
it's
one
just
number?
I think it's just a counter.
Okay, that's hard.
I could be wrong. We've updated that a lot recently, so
Right.
maybe we can add more information.
I'm pretty sure they're just counters. I mean, they can have a name, like that you can, like it's a name and a counter, so you can have I'm not gonna, I'll put my foot in my mouth if I try to describe this, but like you could have issue type feature, you know, as like the name and then whatever the action is plus a count of that and go to it that way. But it's not like you would have, you know, metadata on the actual count, if that makes sense.
I wonder if there's a generic way to do it where there's a counter for objects that have children or have more than one child that would be towards an epic, like parented objects as a count, and then just have the whole whack of everything as a count. I don't know if we could scale, especially if users rename those objects. I don't know if we could scale Redis Hill to get each one. But a concept I was thinking about for the front end trackers would be like, how many children do I have, which is an indication of being higher up in the planning tree. That doesn't track to just the name of the issue type.
Yeah, and like as we're thinking of that type of stuff, we should also think if we think the trends for self-managed will be different than our SaaS platform, because if they won't be, then I think we can get away with just tracking some of this stuff on GitLab.com through Snowplow, which is a lot easier to get more of that kind of rich metadata from. And then we won't even have to really worry about. We do lose a lot of, well, we lose some information by not getting some of the usage ping stuff. But like I said, if the trends are going to be the same, it may not be worth the effort to add this type of tracking to self-managed.
So where
I do.
gets
I was just going to say, I do think we can add a counter though for if like the count of objects that are parents, right?
Yeah, you
So
can 7th level parent, 6th level parent, 5th level or something.
or just if it's for mal purposes, we can just say like anything that, like any issue type that is a parent, you know, we can count separately. And then you just have a count of total.
When you add tasks though, under issues, you'll lump into that. And then, yeah, this is an issue because Gabe and I both have to do our team's Gmail on those 2 separate objects. So right now, my epics are all going to go into his project management counters. Epics will all go into that. So maybe I could.
I'll do some research on that.
I could do my MAU is like all above 3 levels up parents, the counters on those or something. We could draw a line in the sand for number of nesting is what we would be tracking off for portfolio planning.
That would work. Let's open up an issue and talk about it some more. But I'm fine with that, however we want to figure it out.
Okay. Okay, so that's another big one. Redis Hill, we've already got front end trackers kind of throughout, which needs more definition, but we can do those in the issues. Donald, I just wanted to come back. You said you had a like this detail page for the team to be able to weight this. You're going to need that. That's probably the biggest blocker right now, would you say, in terms of this list?
Sorry, to get the, because we don't have the design for it. Like, is that what you asked?
Yeah, like
we need the design.
This feature detail page, the biggest block right now from a front end perspective to the team being able to weight things like editing title, description, assignees. Is this the whole design blocking you?
So, I mean, we can start off with weighing what it would take to build this stuff out in a kind of greenfield page without a design attached to it. So just essentially using widgets for a lot of these components. But then we'll probably need to reweight it once we do get the design, depending on how different it is from our current issue page.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, I mean, this, if we make a feature issue type, there's probably not much blocking us from editing those, like creating and editing those with the existing issue view with the type field. Like, I mean, like, that's obviously not what we're going for long term, but would that be like sufficient, or do we need to do the kind of like new like creation UI as well as part of the MVC one.
It is, feature create is in there too, because you'd have to be able to create it, which also requires title description.
I'll follow up with Holly and see where we're at and see if we can at least like we're at a point where we know where the title and the description will live. And then like as we, because each of these like widgets is going to be different, needs to be kind of rethought a little bit now because of the inheritance model and some of the stuff that we were talking about, Kristen, yesterday about, you know, showing actuals versus estimates and that sort of stuff. So we can treat each one separately. But I'll see where Holly's at and if we're far enough along at least to start with the stuff we need from VC1. And then as we work on the other ones, we can wait. Each like basically widget is its own issue.
Yeah, and maybe that shell could be plus 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now for Holly. So she gets like the majority of a release to work through those issues, those problems, and see where we align, because the team will already be kind of weighting these, so they're coming together. Okay.
Yeah, and back to your question, Jake. So the create page, I'd imagine, is going to be like really similar. At least the UI is going to be really similar to the detail page, just with everything editable. As far as either starting from scratch or reusing what we currently have for issuable, I think the idea is that we want to start from scratch just because there's so much baggage with issues right now that it would take just as much effort to remove everything from the current issuable page than it would be to just create a whole new UI, a whole new object around plan objects or features.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess my point was that like, if you can create an issue currently, or like with kind of work that has been in progress for issue types, like if you can create an issue and select a type of feature, even though it doesn't like necessarily have all the magic that we want to eventually like prescribe to this object, like that would exist in create a record, I guess is my only like, and is that a, should we block us from doing that? Like, should we not make that a possible thing? Because it probably is going to happen by default.
We could just
add a feature.
The old way for this first MVC for testing, and this, if it needs more time from design, we could bump down in the list for the new view page, the good one.
Yeah, I'm fine with reusing the existing create thing and just selecting the type feature for now, because even if like it doesn't all work, like it's going to be behind a feature flag for one project that we just have access to, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
because that will let us create the object, feature object, that then we just have to scope it to whenever it's type feature, the new view app that is the new issue view that we're working on, if that makes sense.
And that would give
just
a break to figure that out.
Just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we don't do that, Donald, and like that I don't want to make more work where you have to then go in and remove a bunch of stuff from the issue. I just think that like that's going to be something, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but like I think that if we just add, for example, like very bare bones, no other functionality, we add a feature type, or I'm sorry, an issue type called feature, and it's like there's nothing else to it. It's just like we create the issue type, it's the title of it is feature, and we have that drop down currently for the other issue types. It's going to appear there, and then you create an issue that has type of feature, and that's sort of just like creating a record in the database. It doesn't give us any of the functionality we need to make this thing actually what it is, but it exists. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like that's going to happen, and then we can do whatever on the front end in terms of like making a more custom experience for actually creating these things appropriately.
Yeah, because the goal would be that they'd be just as flexible as these, where you could turn on and off. So you could have an add page where technically you could have any field exposed very easily versus just the top few that we currently use. So we'll just,
that's still going to be all new.
Yeah, that will add to the function. We can build on later, but that's kind of the vision, that it would be really flexible to add. Okay, so that makes sense. So our MVC got a little smaller in terms of what we must have. Holly has a little more time to do the add a new. I'm just gonna go back to the agenda, make sure. Oh yeah, the commenting. So that could be something that is started in parallel. Parity of comments. Once we have the structure up there, there could be some in an engineering DRI that works on that theme of that conversion. And while others are probably working on hierarchy or things like that. So we can get more creative with how we start structuring some of these, especially the parity objects, like bringing over all the fields or comments. It's not a copy. I know it's not a copy paste thing, but it's more of a conversion than is some of the new functionality, like the hierarchy.
Right, so I had a question on this, and Donald, it's probably for you. Like, do we, given, I know that we have a long-term goal to get discussions as a thing converted over to like Vue and Apollo and whatever other subscriptions probably, but like, can we drop the existing? Is it like very painful if we were just use the existing discussions and then we, whenever that, because I don't know that we're, as a part of this planning objects long-term effort, planning on doing the comments refactor and notes, or I mean, maybe we are. I don't know. That seems
yeah,
like a big chunk of scope.
Go ahead, Gabe.
I was just gonna say, I think the goal is to refactor to a single tech stack. So even if like I know we have to do the GraphQL stuff for discussions and system notes and that sort of thing, I would just like to go ahead and do it as part of this, so that it, like when we go live, we have a single tech stack in the front end. If that makes sense, and the back end.
Yes, I agree. To answer your question though, Jake, technically yes, because I mean it is a Vue app. It's just its own Vue app right now. So we could drop it in, ideally, because I imagine we also want to rethink the current UX of commenting.
We aren't
and
for this
discussions.
first. We're gonna leave comments as is in terms of the design and focus all the design on parenting right now. There'll be a slight shift to a more mobile view for the full layout, mobile friendly view. But
Okay.
they're gonna behave the same way from what we've been talking about on the design calls.
What about deep linking? Like the UX around going to a directly to a note, to a discussion, is kind of wonky right now.
That should get its own effort and its own like design phase, and all of the like commenting type functionality should get looked at like on its own once we've got the object up in Vue. But Gabe can speak to that too, but we aren't going to go crazy on comments right now because there's so much other complexity to this effort. But it should be done, especially once we have the stage set in the same tech stack. Gabe, did you want to talk about that just in terms of addressing comment? Like, all the things we now need to fix about commenting isn't going to be in this MVC to get epics down, but
well, I would say not in MVC 1, but we want to do it as part of getting epics down, is we want to refactor what is the issue view to a single Vue app that's all based on GraphQL and Apollo, right? And so like we're not changing like the UX of how you add a comment necessarily, or what a system note looks like. It might change the layout a little bit, like CSS related things, but I still think that that's where like it could be a dedicated work stream with an engineer DRI who's focused on the API, the GraphQL API for it. And then like we basically, I don't want to create this whole new thing and go down this and then just like drop something old in that isn't refactored. But I agree with like doing MVC 1 first, which is creating the feature, and then like taking each thing that needs to be refactored on the issue view and having it be sort of like a parallelizable work stream, if that makes sense, that different teams can pick up.
Yeah, so the question here then is, are we okay with getting to the end of MVC1 without comments at all? Or should we drop in old comments and then remove it once we finish the refactor comments?
I think they can just left and just focus on the top side of the experience. And those, like we said, that could be a parallel work stream. So if there is an engineer or two that you think would want to start on that from day one, because it might be a really heavy lift to do the whole conversion over 6 months, like that could kick off at the same time as MVC1 or right on its heels as soon as the object's up.
Yeah, I agree with that approach, because I don't want to drop in the old one, because we may get to the point of, I'm not saying that we would, but that, hey, this is good enough,
right?
And then not get back to actually doing the refactor.
So I've got that as a theme, and it did have MVC3, but technically it could be like 1.5. Like none of these are set in stone. As soon as the object's up, we could kick that off. And same with this, the parity of all epic fields. That's going to be a big long list of just field conversions that could start once the model's up. It could be the engineers could pick up ones that they want to move over. I don't know how you want to structure all of those, but those ones are more of like a free-for-all. And I think where it would get more complicated is once we have the parenting work, and what that will be a little more working tightly with design.
Yeah, so what parity of all epic fields, does that mean having parity of features to equal epics, or features to equal issues?
Epics, because the goal of our endeavor is to get epics to be able to migrate. But ideally, we want to support all. So in this, the ones that are turned on to Y for this new object, so like related MRs, emoji counts, things like that, all of those would need to be exposed to unblock the migration of epics over. But for this to be an object that can show any issue type, you're right, like we would have to, every single one that an issue currently uses also needs to be enabled. And then some will be more complex, like Abe was mentioning, ones that are in orange or pink. Like if you're a parent, if you have children, you should always be able to see a tally, like a sum of your children's weights, and potentially enter a weight or an estimated weight. Same with like health status. There's going to be a lot of scenarios where like a mini roll-up is happening and a data entry. And so those ones won't be like copy paste, but a lot of these other ones, just participants, lockability, confidentiality, the way it works is going to be the same. It's just moving those ones over.
It might have a different place in the UX, but the behavior isn't changing, if that makes sense. I think somewhere in there too, what we want to do, and it might even be before we can migrate epics onto this, is to turn on this view for issues, current issues themselves. Right. And like the way I was thinking about rolling that out is letting people, when we get to a place where there is relative parity with current issues, is enabling people to opt into the new issue view for a couple of releases to test it out and get feedback and kind of track adoption. And then once we're satisfied with and we got some of the kinks worked out, then rolling it out more broadly, making it the default and replacing the old detail view. But I don't know when we'll get there.
Yeah, like this has to merge over to that view, and then mine is the heavier migration, but figuring those two out. The other thing that we didn't discuss right away is just the assumption through MVC1 that we're in this hierarchy that is feature issue under the hood, which is separate from the hierarchy of like issues and test cases or other templates that we have going on currently. So some of what would have to be thought through is like, how do we run these kind of multiple planning object defaults behind the scenes? And then eventually we'll be exposing those to the user. what do we call them? How are they stored? How are they accessed by the API? Everything that we would need to kind of, and we'll go out with just GitLab defaults with feature to issue or epic to issue initially, but that model, I don't know where to capture that in here, but that also needs to start being fleshed out.
I think that's in the second one, is where we have to add parenting to issue types.
Right. As soon as you're adding your children.
We'll need to think about the interesting thing to think about here is that if we add like a new parenting widget or whatever on the feature and we relate an issue, do we also need to show, like, how do we show that on the old issue view, or do we? Right. So I think there may be an opportunity, like when we get to a point with the current related or linked items, to replace the old issue linked items with the new widget, but we can kind of sort that out, or we can decide just like, you know, we're not gonna even show it on the old issue view, and then we'll just show it on the new one when we cut over. So we'll have to figure that out.
Okay, so I think we've talked through everything. John, you had some comments. Do we have a different interface for feature cred? Oh, we talked through that as well.
Yeah, I mean, Jake brought it up and then Donald answered it, so I hope I summarized it right. But like my understanding leaving that conversation is that we're going to probably reuse the issue creation view, but completely redesign the detail and list views. Is that right?
The list view hasn't been redesigned yet. This is a new combined list view. The designers haven't taken that on, but that towards the end of this, within 3 to 4 months, you're right, we should have a new issue view that can handle any object type.
So my takeaway was that we might be able to temporarily reuse the create, like the current create screen, but eventually we'll need to replace it with whatever front end magic is and design magic is created. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think MVC1 is focused on the detail page, and we just need some way to easily create features, whether that be create a new feature page that just has, like, you know, styling, or just basic, essentially the same that we're going to do for list, or just adding the type behind a feature flag to our current issue create page.
Okay, yeah, I dragged it down, so that one's not a blocker, but if the team wants to, and there's a design that comes soon, we could add that in. Are we all in favor of me getting these over into at least MVC1 into the first architecture, sorry, not architecture, the first implementation epic that the team will start waiting? And obviously this is just the starting point. You can, like I mentioned, you can add, edit, delete these issues as new questions come up with the team. You have full control to break these down more.
Yeah, I guess this kind of goes back to what I think John mentioned earlier, in that, like, as we break this down to be more granular from an issue perspective, I think that, like, some of these will, in terms of weighting them or getting an accurate weight that, like, provides us an estimation of the effort, like, some of them would be naturally combined into, like, one little piece of work. For example, yeah, editing the title and description probably is like one you know, one chunk of work that is a 3 weight or something, or, you know, a 5 or whatever, versus, but they may, it sounds like from your perspective, it's better to have those broken down into 2 issues. I just, like, they probably won't be weighted independently.
When we get to these fields, it's not, we don't have a design that's gating it that gives a big picture usually, unless it's one of those new complex roll-up fields. So yeah, you're right, because the design would be coming from the main view page. So as long as they get combined, and then the actual, like, requirement of having the tracking happening on both fields and things like that, as long as we get into a rhythm where we are looking at the tracking, the original design, yeah, I don't really care, like, how we group them up for weighting.
need to think about this a bit more. Like, but Jake, maybe you can weigh in as well. If it seems like most of the backend work here is going to be creating an additional feature type for issues and then feature flagging the APIs so somebody can't, discover that this feature exists and create it on a project or a group that we haven't enabled the feature flag for. Because it seems like this is going to live for like 6 months in the back end, right? Before anyone else can use it except us. We basically have all this stuff already because we're just reusing issues. So from a back end perspective, the work's a little bit weird. It's like implement this like this one tiny change, but then most of the effort goes in gating it to make sure that it can't be accidentally misused, that like these features don't start showing up in our issue lists by accident because we're kind of consuming the feature on our own behind a feature flag.
I think they
Does
would
that
show
sound
up in the list if the feature flag's enabled, right? So that way we can get back to them because we can reuse the existing list now. If it's just a type of issue, we already show incidents and we already show issues. Right now, I linked this in the bottom. There's a merge request that Brett has open to move issue type to a separate table. And I think we need to do this so we move away from using enums. Like this was sort of like the first thing that we needed to do in order to add customizable issues in the long run. So it would be like finishing this up and then putting like the default type and maybe only adding the default type of feature along with what already exists, and then putting that one default type behind a feature flag. So if the feature flag is enabled, you'd be able to create an issue with of type feature and you'd be able to view issue type incident in the list. Issue list.
That's interesting. I know, like I'm just imagining as a user going to the GraphQL Explorer and, using the create issue mutation and then entering type and then seeing this feature option suggested, that then you try and you get this weird response saying it exists, but you're not entitled to use it or something like that. And it's just going to be like this kind of weird interim state. But yeah, this is an interesting MR. I do think like some housekeeping like this is probably in order, but for the most part, I see the back end for the first MVC being pretty straightforward. So maybe we should look at, Jake, whether we can split the work to start widgetizing stuff or even look at the hierarchy thing and get a jump on that.
Yeah, I was thinking the hierarchy maybe is probably the hardest or one of the more difficult new things to figure out for issues. So.
Yeah. Is there any value in having a GitLab default set of planning objects? And if users differ from them, we can also notice it, but our API is kind of, and our documentation is always kind of showing around a specific best-in-class way to set up. And we could get some tracking around people who decide to go away from it or use a different one like safe or something.
Do you mean like if we expect people to have features as the parents of issues, but they continue to have like single level epics or something?
Right. They rename at some point. Because we do have renaming coming.
Yeah. Are you planning to basically convert all single level epics to features? Is it that we'll migrate to that at some point? So people log on one day and they'll see that all their, like premium customers will see that all their epics are now features.
So that migration is going to be a much bigger discussion. We're still, I think, thinking through the nuance of it all. But once we figure out how a feature works, we've solved epics. So we can have a new type that works the exact same way and is an epic and put that at either the project or group level and figure out the migration plan onto that other object that now could be called epic v2 or something. But feature still needs to exist as a planning object because it's something that's used in safe and a lot of other planning theory. So I don't, like we're proving we can do it with this and getting all the views correct. And then we will still need to have the planning object for all the epics come over, solve 7 levels deep in some of our customers that are sitting there with all of this nesting do we support that? Do we give them just this generic epic or folder object that retains their current work and they can manually move it over into the new model when they're ready? There's a lot of open discussions still to be had on that. But I don't think
Yeah, we can't automatically migrate them anyway, right? Because epics are at the group level and features are at the project level.
If we wait 6 months and the two have combined, then we could. So we could automatically move them onto this new epic object at group level that has all these goodies with it. But let's wait and see how close we can get the two together before we take all that effort.
I think it's also worth noting as part of this, just to support all of the different use cases, the sort of working theory is that there's going to be, so we'll add support for multiple, what I'm just calling right now, work item hierarchies, right? And because you have like test sessions and test cases, you have multiple levels of requirements, and then you have, let's say, you know, your temporal planning objects. And so like we might need to like think about having the issue types belong to one of these types of hierarchies. But the idea is that you can still have parents from across each hierarchy and sort of link things. So you can do like multi-tree is what I call it. That's all stuff we can figure out as we go, but we don't need to do that for, you know, MVC1, but we'll need to figure that out probably before we do the migration. And we also need to figure it out to support the other use cases that we want, like with requirements and with quality management and all of those other things. So.
So I think the original question was around the API and looking for features in the API, but there could be any named planning objects going forward. And should there be default GitLab ones that we care about, like epic, issue, feature?
Kristen, we could do some more customer discovery around what the default name, what the default hierarchy would be if you want. Because I would kind of, you know, at the end of the day, I would hope we would get to the point where you say like, hey, if you're using safe, click this button and you're going to have this default hierarchy. Or if you're doing this other methodology, you're going to have this default hierarchy, and we actually generate that for them when they like initialize their namespace or something like that.
Totally on board for that. And maybe doing our GitLab preferred, what we think would be best, and then having an easy switch to something like safe, or an import like safe to safe.
Yep.
Okay, so next steps, I'm gonna work on the sheet just a little bit more, tune it up. I'll get at least MVC1 into a spot and hand it over to, well, some of those are gonna start in workflow design because Holly and Alexis are on them right now trying to get the designs up, but that doesn't mean we can't start the conversation on weighting them as well. So there'll be a little overlap just in this next 2 to 3 weeks while we try to get weights on all of them. But the goal would be at the end of 14.1, we've got a nice implementation epic ready to go, weights on most of the gotchas surface that we can during that planning process. So that makes sense.
Plan is to start the work in 14.2.
Yes, or sooner if someone wants to just peel off. If we come to an agreement and someone wants to just start working, they can once we've got weights and everything.
Okay.
Yeah, 14.2 would be the due date, I guess, to get at least MVC1 weighted.
Cool. Thanks.
We should also use 14.1 to run any spikes we want to determine. Like, just because we're weighing these things doesn't mean we have to have all the answers as far as the level of effort. Some things are going to require spikes that hopefully afterwards we'll be able to get a better feel for a more accurate weight.
And any of these MVCs, just drop an issue in there, spike big letters, and just say this, take this much capacity or this much time. I want you all to own this just as much as rearranging, deleting, adding. So it can be collaborative. It's not a glass house. Like, I'm going to get the structure up, but it'll get however messy it needs to get for us to find the finish line. Okay. I think I got everything I need to take next steps. Are you all good?
think so, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'll post this one up to YouTube so the designer and the rest of the team can see it.
Thanks, Kristen. Good job facilitating.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
See y'all.
See ya.